Hello, do you remember this? This is the fiberglass boat hull that I bought a while ago, and the plan was to do this up on the cheap by using drone parts or aircraft parts, motors and props and so on, and make it into an airboat, and at the same time prove how clever I was for making a skid steer arrangement with ArduPilot, you know, autonomous and all that stuff. But if you saw that video, you'll know that it didn't work out very well. In fact, it was a miserable failure. And it also kind of left a bad taste in my mouth for boats in general. And another problem is that it's quite a long way for me to drive to get to somewhere that's a decent body of water to try this kind of stuff on. So I've just sort of been ignoring it for a while, letting it collect dust. But every now and then I think I should do something about this, but there's a couple of problems. One is that I know that to set it up as a proper boat, like with a proper boat motor, ESC and all the cooling stuff that you need to go along with it, is quite expensive, especially for this one because it's quite heavy. Weighs 6.5 kilos, just like this, with nothing in it. It's completely empty. So you're going to need a big motor to push that, which is going to require a big ESC, big batteries and everything. And the money was just putting me off because I'm not really that much into boats. This is probably the only one I'll ever have, maybe, I don't know. So the cost was one thing, and also putting in the energy to research what motor you need with what prop, and how much current you're going to need and all that kind of stuff, because it's going to be electric, not petrol, even though this one was set up for petrol there, I think that's what that is. Yeah, so that was putting me off, but then it occurred to me, what if I did it up really nice, like more nicer than what I would for myself, and then I can sell it. So hopefully that would justify spending the more money. Does that make sense? Anyway, so that's what I've decided to do. I'm going to do it up really quite nice as I can do it with my skills. And now that I know a little bit more about fiberglassing and stuff, hopefully I can make things a little bit nicer. Those holes that I covered over by just gluing stuff on the back there, I can do that a bit better this time. Yes, I did have some parts there for a external prop drive boat. But what I've decided to do is make this into a jet boat because it has a little bit more of a cool factor, and also it just seems a bit easier to me to stick a jet pump in here and get the mounting done in there than it would be to kind of mount this to an electric motor up here. And there's a lot of drag on this too. When you try and turn this shaft here, boy, it's hard to turn. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be like that or what. But anyway, so I'm going to just ignore these parts that I got here, and I found a complete set with a jet pump and ESC and motor and a servo as well, actually, on AliExpress. So that's what that is there. That just arrived. I'll have a look at that in a minute. And that sort of frees me up from having to figure out what is the best combination of motor KV and prop size and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just hoping that this unit will be strong enough to push this boat because, like I say, 6.5 kilos empty. This stuff weighs about 1 kilo. And then if the batteries I use are going to go to calculation, that's probably another 4.5 kilos. So we're looking at 10.5 to 11 kilos just to get the thing moving. So it's going to be pretty heavy, and this is going to have to be pretty powerful. The seller claims that they're getting 7.5 kilos of thrust from this. I think it was 7 or 7.5, something like that. That's on 6S though. Not sure if I'm going to be able to use 6S, but should be able to do 4 or 5. Okay, let's see what we've got in here. We have an Emax jet unit. Color 150 amp ESC. Connectors on there. Nothing on the battery side. There we go. Wow, that's heavy. And cooling jacket already installed. Holy smokes, I can't even, oh yeah, I can turn it. I can just turn it, but I have to get a good grip on this flat side to get it to turn. Wow, that's probably quite a powerful motor there. That's like 10 or 15% throttle on 4S, and it's already pushing quite a bit of air out there. A little bit of wobble there, but this side has a bearing on it there, so that holds it in the middle there nicely. And these vanes are curved to straighten the flow for more thrust. I think you want the water to go directly backwards rather than sort of spiraling and flicking out to the sides. If I understand it correctly, I don't know a whole lot about this. I'm just wondering how this is stuck in there, because this piece wouldn't have been moulded in there. And I do see a little bit of like epoxy looking stuff up there. Can you see that little whitish blob right about the middle of the screen? Is it just glued in there? I wonder. Doesn't seem to be any oh, there's a thing. Maybe there's like a little peg or pin that goes in there that holds that. At least that one vane at the top would be held by that maybe, but the rest of them, I can't see how they're stuck in there. It seems pretty solid though. I'm noticing some water marking around here. So I'm guessing that they've actually put this all together and given it a test run in water. And here on the inside of the nozzle, I'm also noticing there's some more water marks, or whatever you call it. But here, they're very straight. They're very straight lines. So it definitely looks like there's been water thrusting against that side there. It's extraordinarily difficult to get it on camera though, so just trust me, it's there. So I'm pretty sure they've actually test run this, which I suppose is a good sign. It has worked at one point in the past, at least. Interestingly, this came out of the box. It was set to be forward and reverse. So when you put the throttle in the middle position, it would stop. And then one way or the other would turn the motor forwards or backwards, which is, I don't think you really want that with a jet boat. So it's kind of funny that the motor has been test run, but the ESC is set up wrong, or at least to my mind, what seems to be wrong. So maybe this wasn't the ESC that they tested it with. Anyway, I'm also, I was a little surprised to see that these cooling tubes, they just go straight through from one side to the other. I always thought that they sort of made a little bit of a detour in here under these heatsink fins and then out again, but I guess that's good enough. So the servo is an Emax ES3004 metal gear. A little bit on the small side for than what I would expect, but anyway, it's probably okay. And there's a nice little cutout there for the servo cable to go in this mounting. A little bit close here on the motor, but I guess you don't need that one at the back anyway. These pieces here, which I thought was some sort of a thick rubber, are actually fiberglass G10, I think it's called. And also this plate underneath here is fiberglass, same kind of G10 stuff. Looks like about 2 millimeters thick. It's pretty chunky. Here's the outside part of the jet pump just sellotaped into place for some visualization. I was worried about this, that it might be a little bit on the small side when I was purchasing it, because the impeller diameter is only 36 or 35 millimeters and the nozzle inside diameter is only 18, or actually closer to 19 when I measured this actual one that I have here. And that seemed to me rather small compared to some of the other ones that you can get. But when I stick it on there, you know, it's not too bad. It's probably, it still looks a little on the small side maybe. However, I was watching a video the other day, a guy called Mike Finnegan has built a jet boat with some crazy, it's like double turbocharged, like 1700 horsepower or something like that. And I've watched a few of those videos, but it wasn't until I'd watched about the third one where they showed a close-up of the nozzle, and it's really small. And I thought, wow, all that power is coming out of a very, very small nozzle and pushing this boat to like 100 miles an hour in 5 seconds or something. So that sort of made me think that it's not just the size of the nozzle that's important. And one thing I really do like about this particular one that I've got is that it's metal. It's not plastic or some crappy 3D printed one like you can get. There are ones that are a fair bit cheaper than this, but when you take a close look, they're just sort of 3D printed. And that, I mean, I have seen 3D printed jet boat videos as well on YouTube where people are running, 3D printed parts, even 3D printed impeller, like the blades of the impeller are 3D printed. They seem to work. But it's just not my cup of tea, you know. When you're putting so much power through something like this, I just couldn't get a 3D printed one. And there are also plastic or PVC sort of molded ones as well, which you can get in various sizes, which is quite nice too, because this one you can only get in this particular size that I've seen. but for the molded ones and the 3D printed ones, you can get a very, very gradually varying range of sizes, which is quite nice. But all things considered, I think this doesn't look too bad there. And if they can, if the claim that they've made about 5 kilos thrust on 3S and 7.5 kilos thrust on 6S is true, then I think it'll be fine. So I think the first task is just to get all this crap off there. Who would do that? Ugh. And he's glued these into here as well. What a clown. Ooh. That's probably not going to work. Oh, look. Ah, what the hell? The keel and the transom here are not at 90 degrees to each other. So one way or the other, I'm going to end up having to match either this faceplate here to the transom or this one to the keel. And then whichever one I don't match, I'm going to have to sort of cut it away and then probably build it up a little bit so that it has something to bolt into. So my original plan was that I would start by matching this on here and keeping this as the one that matches the original on the transom. And that would give me about 4 or 5 degrees down thrust here, which would push the bow of the boat down, which is not really ideal. I think it would work pretty nicely still because it would be going almost exactly through the center of gravity, which I kind of like. But after reading around a little bit more, I think it seems to be more of a common practice to make it so that the thrust line of the jet pump is going to be matching the keel, and that'll help the boat, the whole boat as a whole, sort of to lift out of the water a little bit easier. So what I've decided to do is, instead of that, I'm going to use this as the bottom piece here is going to be what stays, and then this is going to end up being cut out quite a bit and sort of built up maybe. So to start off with, I'm just going to put this in here, and sort of where it sits is where that circle is. Cut a hole there to start with so that this bit here can poke out through it, and then I'll just drill into the bottom here so that at least I can fix this in, and then I can replace this or screw this on there somehow, and then this will give me a template for where the hole actually needs to be cut out in the bottom. And I'm going to have to flatten off a fair bit of this down here, I think, to make it sort of smooth in nicely. But the bottom of this boat, or the whole thing really, the walls of it are quite thick, so I should be able to just file or sand flat away and still have enough material remaining for the screws here that go in there to hold it on. And then what's going to happen here, I have no idea at this point, but I'm starting to get paralyzed by indecision about which way to go on this. So I just got to do something to keep this moving, otherwise I'll just never get anything done. Okay, so yeah, so that's flat on the transom and that's flat on the keel. So I could still go either way actually, couldn't I? I think flat on the keel is going to be easier to install it all around, so that's what I'll go with. Okay, so I gouged out quite a bit on the bottom area on the inside here, and it's probably now about 3mm thick towards the bottom, and that got me a few more millimeters further back for mounting this piece. But if you look at these lines here, I've got the large black line there is where this needs to come down to in order for the bearing to fit into the shaft, so it's going to have to be down at least down to there, and the little black line above that is where I am at the moment, so I've got another 5mm or so to go. So I'm going to try taking some out of the top on the outside, because this is still a good 8mm at least thick here. So hopefully between sort of alternating backwards and forwards between the outside at the top and the inside at the bottom, I'll end up with a fairly flat piece there that's still hopefully 3 or 4mm thick that I can securely clamp these two pieces together onto. Okay, so it took a good couple of hours or so, but I've managed to dig away quite a lot of material from the top on the outside and the bottom on the inside, so that we're left with about 3 to 4mm thickness all round. And my black marks there, if I put this in, and now not quite showing through, but I think the black marks were a little bit conservative, so that's fine. But the point is that when I put this on here, see how it gets stuck at that point? That's because I didn't have the bearing and the shaft lined up properly. Oh, sometimes it just falls straight on, but more often it kind of gets stuck at about that point there. So that means that whatever distance I push this down now is the shaft going into the bearing. And it's about 3 millimeters going into the bearing there, I think, so that should be plenty. And at the bottom there's about a 2 millimeter or so gap here that's going to have to be filled in. Okay, so that angle there is what seems to me to be about right. Unfortunately though, that is not with the inside of the pump sitting on flat on the keel, because I noticed that the keel, it's mostly straight until it gets to this from about here back, and then it slopes up a bit. So if I sit the pump straight on the bottom of the keel, the nozzle is going to be facing a little bit too much up, at least to my intuition. So what I've done here, a little bit of wood sticking up there so it's not sitting flat on the ground, and that's exactly where I would like to have it. However, that's going to make things rather more complicated, so I'm probably not going to do that, and I'm just going to have it sitting flat on the ground. And let's see if we can have a look at that. Hopefully it'll yeah, it's a small change, so hopefully it's not going to be a big deal, and I'm just going to try it like that and see what we get, because who the hell knows if we don't try, hey? So I spent a while cutting away this area here to lower it down at the back a bit, and that lowered it at this point about 5 mil. Still very thick here though, probably at least 4 or 5 millimeters thick here where my thumb is, and same there. And also gouged out a little bit further to let me put it back a little bit further as well. So that sits in there very nicely. Doesn't quite come to the angle that I was hoping for with the thrust line, but it's probably about halfway there. So I'm just going to stop there, and that is probably going to be fine. To fix this into place, I've just drilled the 2 holes at the back. They're the only ones that I could reach because this thing's getting in the way. And then I put a couple of screws in there, and hopefully I can just use this thing to get the other holes in the right place and drill them in from the bottom, which will be much easier. And I can adjust the screws here to sort of get that in the right angle before I do it. I did a little bit more grinding on the inside here where the jet pump sits in right at the back, and I brought it all the way to, see that little gap there? That's actually a hole. And the bottom corner of the jet pump is right behind that hole, and on this side there's a bit of a bump there, you can see where it's kind of like dented there. I think that's the other corner of it on this side poking through. So that means that the pump is basically as low as it could possibly get without poking through the bottom of the hull, which is exactly what I wanted, and that brings the angle even slightly closer to what I wanted as well. That intake looks kind of small, doesn't it? I hope this pump's going to be strong enough. Okay, so I removed that piece and I filed around here, around the edges to match the intake itself, so it's all nice and smooth and flush in here, because it's a little bit longer at the front where the motor mount attaches on the other side, and should be fine to just cut into this also there to match that up. Alright, well that sits in there kind of nice and flat now, so that's good. Unfortunately it's a bit thinner than I thought here. See, it's almost breaking right through there. Oops, there. So I will grind this down a little bit, but maybe not as aggressively as I was thinking originally. And I managed to crack right through here and here as well. So this whole area has become quite weak, but it's still holding into place nicely, which is the main thing, because I'll be able to come back afterwards and build up some more around the outsides, because there's going to be a gap down here that will need to be filled. So I'm thinking to sort of smooth this off with some more glass or epoxy or something or other, microfibers maybe later on. So it just needs to hold everything in place till I've got this locked in. And this bit here being weak is probably not a huge deal, because the jet pump itself is very strong and solid around that corner, so it doesn't really require that the hull is holding it, holding strength right here. Okay, that all fits fairly nicely, and I'm quite happy with the minimum of I've left as much material there as I can, and it's still thick enough to hold it. So thank goodness these walls were quite thick, and it's also given me just a little bit of gaps here that I don't want, that I'm going to have to fill in later, but not much, mainly just here. Ow. Yeah, that crack is getting worse. Oh no. Yeah, I'll have to be careful with that, but everything's fitting quite nicely.